Good evening. Welcome and thank you for your interest in gender dignity, unique and equal. It's January 2016, and today I have with me a special guest, Andrew. He's going to tell you a little journey about himself, his recovery journey, his trans story. I'm also interested because I am a trans guy, and I think we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the unique position that trans men have in this world. We both sort of feel that we're missing in the narrative a little bit, so we're quite passionate about some things that are unique to trans men, and we're going to discuss that today. Thank you so much for your interest. So Andrew, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we met at Maine Transnet, and then we just sort of reconnected and spoke the other evening at Whole Foods, and we found we had an awful lot in common. So I want you to just talk a little bit about your story, how you came to terms with being trans, and then we're just going to go from there.
Okay. Let's see, I'm 29 years old, so I think like a lot of, I didn't know I was trans. I didn't know what trans meant for a long time, so I can't say that I grew up knowing I was trans, but I've been digging to try to figure out when I really knew, and I think I know by getting clothes and stuff when I was a kid, and I always wanted boys' clothes and stuff, and I was definitely like a tomboy or what was considered that, and I definitely presented as lesbian for a long time until when I was 19 years old, I moved to Boston, and actually I used to have like shoulder-length hair for a really long time. It was really awkward. I never knew what to do with hair. Like I don't know. And so when I moved to Boston, I was about a month in, and I shaved my head just completely. And it was like one of the most liberating things. I'm glad I had that experience because now I just have short hair anyways. But I'm glad I had that experience going from the two different drastic changes there. And I think for a while I still presented as a butch lesbian, and I was really into that whole community. Mm-hmm. And then when I was about, I think around 23, between 23 and 24, I started, and I used to actually go to Pride, and I would avoid like anything having to do with transgender things, like the
really?
tents,
Okay.
yeah. Trans tents and stuff. I wouldn't go near them, and I didn't know at the time. I was just terrified. I really was scared to be trans. It was just in my mind. It was like, oh, that's so different. I don't want to be like that. And I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by a lot of people that really were understanding, and I think that kind of gave me the courage to finally look at myself and realize that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I was. So I started the process. It wasn't very drawn out for me. I went to a gender therapist that was also a trans man, and so it really wasn't like having to convince him that I was trans too, which also kind of instilled in me like, okay, this is definitely right,
That was the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I started on, so it's been about 4.5 years since I started giving myself testosterone shots, and do that weekly, and yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I'm glad to be on it.
I'm glad that you are. I'm really curious though, how you knew the difference between that you weren't a butch lesbian, but that you knew you were trans. Explain, because people have asked me, what's the difference between a really masculine lesbian and a trans person? So tell me your experience about how you knew it was different.
I think the best way I can answer that is to say that I, even presenting as sort of butch as possible, and like being, and I've always been attracted to women throughout, no matter what, and so presenting as lesbian, dating women and stuff, I still didn't feel comfortable. It still didn't feel like right. Like something was off. Like it just wasn't. I couldn't feel comfortable in my own skin, and I think for a long time I didn't know. Like I said, I didn't know when I didn't know what trans was. I didn't know what that meant. So I think like I think it was just as simple for me as this. Is once I figured out like what trans was, it just was like, oh, that's me, and like
made sense.
Yeah, it just clicked. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I myself, that's interesting for me because I never went through, I wasn't part of the LGBT community, and I thought I was gay, but I knew I wasn't. I mean, I knew I was attracted to women, but that made sense to me because I was a man. And I too didn't know the name trans. And as soon as I remember hearing it, like I knew that's what it was right away. So yeah, very interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about the dysphoria, because you said you knew you weren't, because you still weren't comfortable in your own skin. And I know there are many trans folks who are not necessarily dysphoric, but you and I talked about this, and you and I very much are.
Yeah.
I know for myself that it is imperative that I have the modifications, and when I say that I mean surgeries, I mean the hormones. And I know there are some folks that they can come to terms with the outward crust of their body and not need that as much. How about for you? What's that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I still, this many years later, I still haven't had any surgeries, and I do want surgeries. I just haven't. It's always been an issue of cost for me. And,
Yeah.
And so, and you know, there are certain surgeries that I want, certain surgeries I don't care for right now, but I do really struggle with like, just self-love and loving my body as it is, and so I think that that's been really really hard for me, because I think I get a little envious of people that can kind of just be okay with themselves, and testosterone for me is like, the way I describe it to someone who doesn't understand is like, well, if you have diabetes and you're insulin dependent, you need that insulin. And I'm like, that's how I feel about my testosterone. And like, there has been times where I've had to go without for various reasons, or like a week or two, or sometimes a month. And that's, I guess, not that drastic, but I've gone as far as to say, with like partners I've been with in the past, to say, hey, if anything ever happened to me, like if I was, if I for some reason like went into a coma or something crazy, like please continue to give me my testosterone. Like I that's really important to me. Like, I mean,
Sure.
I'm on my deathbed, like I want my
Your
shots.
testosterone.
Absolutely.
And Andrew, I'm the same way. If anything happened to me, I would want my shots, and it's so important. I have heard other trans folks who not have access to their hormones. And I sometimes, that will actually put me in a full-blown panic attack to think that I would have to go a month without them. I don't know about you, but even though I feel I pass, which is a term trans folks use when you see us in the identity that we deserve and know that we are, I pass. However, I still struggle with dysphoria. There are still times that I am not happy. There's still times that I do want all the surgery, but for us as trans guys, that's not perfected.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I can appear, I can easily like appear with my clothes on, like, as needed as a man, the way I want to be seen, and people see that, and people are often really shocked when they find out that I am trans, but it's just different when you're alone with yourself, and
Exactly.
you have to, sort of deal with it.
Yes. And now I'm going to switch gears, because I know that you're in recovery and that you have been sober, clean for 6 months. Is that,
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about that process as a trans? Because you went through that as a trans person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And can you tell me about maybe what caused you to start with the drugs, and then how you decided to clean things up, and how that experience was?
Sure. Well, like we talked about before too, is something I struggle with a lot growing up, was mental health, mental illnesses, and depression, anxiety. I've been diagnosed throughout time with, I don't actually know right now what my diagnosis is at this time, and actually it makes sense, because once you get in recovery, it's kind of like you need to reassess things, because you really you can't know when somebody's using. But so before I ever transitioned, I battled depression pretty heavily, and there were a couple times where I did have suicide attempts, where I actually did end up in the hospital and have to you know, one of the times I had to drink charcoal and go through that process, and then spend, you know, like 2 weeks in a mental institution. And I actually haven't had any attempts since I started my transition. So, and it's not something like I really like thought about intensely, but when I say that, I think it's pretty profound.
It is profound.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I started using, you know, I would say a little later than most of the drug addicts that I come in contact with, but I was about 19, 20 when I started kind of experimenting, and it took me quite a few years before I found heroin, and then I got into that for a couple of years, and I definitely think that, and I was actually by the time I actually started doing heroin, I actually was transitioned.
Okay.
You know, well into at least a year into my transitioning, and I think for me it was kind of an escape, because once I transitioned, I don't think I could foresee everything that I was gonna, like, I knew that that's what was gonna make me happy, but I couldn't foresee, like, that the world wasn't necessarily gonna be happy about it, and like how difficult that was gonna be, and how difficult it was gonna be to face like my family, and you know, I was really happy with my changes, but not everybody felt the same way. So
Sure.
I just kind of I think I wanted to go in hiding, and I just something happened, an event in my life happened where I was living in Boston for several years, and I moved back to my hometown, very small town in New Hampshire, and you know, I did get harassed. People would find out about me being trans, because I was living stealth.
Yep.
And so nobody around me knew except my girlfriend at the time. And so there were times where I'd get, and I remember one instance I got like these text messages saying, "We know who you really are," and using my birth name, and sending me a picture actually from like the yearbook when I was like in 8th grade. So, you know, really, I don't know if everybody understands how, I know you do, but how traumatizing that can be, and it's scary to know like that you don't know what people are capable of either, and like what might be at risk of, because people can get pretty angry sometimes about what they don't understand. So, so I think I just like I said, I think I was just hiding, and eventually I had enough of that life, and I couldn't take it anymore. I never really felt like I fit into the drug community, or like I just kind of felt like I was just there because I was using and I was addicted, and there was no way out. And
Right.
so once I found a way out, I took it, and I went off to, the first place I went to was a detox for to get everything out of my body, and that was 7 days, and I was I don't actually remember. I don't think most people. I don't remember if I even told the administration I was trans. There, I was in a room full of 4 other guys, all pretty close together, and that was scary for me. One of the scariest things for me there was the shower situation. There was just like a little curtain, you know. It was kind of a very open situation. I used to be really afraid that somebody was going to just like, I don't know why they would, but you know, these little irrational fears sometimes, and you know, just. I don't know. It was scary, and it definitely brings a level of like loneliness and isolation to the whole thing. And you're already it's already such a hard place to be in, like where I just like left, even though addiction, my active using life was like hectic and scary and awful. It's what I knew. So like to leave all of that behind.
And embark on a healthier
journey.
journey.
It was so. I got through that, and then I went off to rehab, and I spent a long time calling up rehabs, and the rehab I went to said, "Yeah, we're trans friendly," and so I said, "Okay," because that was my biggest question: are you trans friendly, and how am I going to be like roomed? What's my rooming situation?
Sure.
Because I haven't had surgeries and stuff, I think it's important to have my privacy in those situations. You know, just because you don't know how people are going to react, and so I went out there, and I was supposed to be there for 4 weeks, and I spent 2 weeks there. The nurses knew, and they had to give me my shots, and I asked them to do it, you know, on the down low. And what ended up happening is on the ward I was at, there was only one private room, and so I was in that one room. Everybody else had roommates, and it was a mixture of female and males on that unit. And so people started to kind of pick up on something. I don't think they necessarily knew what, but people started to say like really unfriendly things about trans people in general, just sort of in my vicinity. And so that started to wear me down. And you know, rehab also is a very hard place to be. I went to Florida, so I like went far away. So I felt, you know, far away from home, and I actually ended up just like, I kind of grinned and bared it as long as I could, and then I just couldn't.
Yeah.
I started to fall apart a little bit, and I just was like, this isn't going to help. So I did leave early, and which I think is really important to talk about, just because that's a big deal for someone, especially. Well, I don't want to say especially in addiction to heroin, but you know, as an addict, you really need that time, and I just feel really blessed that I did get through it. But a lot of people might not have gone through that sober. So,
you know, unfortunately, though, Andrew, you're not alone at all. Trans men, we have a 47% attempt at suicide. It's a bit higher than trans women. It's not at all. I think 80% of trans folks have addiction issues. And actually, about 80% of trans men typically have psychiatric issues, usually depression, PTSD. And I liked what you said, because I'm in agreement with you about a few things. We knew this is the right thing to do for us. And I thought it was just going to be the most liberating, wonderful, freeing experience. And in many ways, that was true. What I wasn't expecting is what you just said, the pushback from everybody else. I think when people assume that this is a choice, really need to really be factoring in, why would anyone want to be rejected and discriminated against and beaten up? And if it was such a choice, then please inform me why we're trying to kill ourselves. I'm glad that you got some of the support you needed. And so let me see, you went to Florida for the detox part?
I went to Florida for rehab.
For the rehab, okay. But you're in Maine now, and
Yes.
yeah.
And that's been a journey too.
That's been a journey. Well, Maine has a terrific heroin problem right now. So how have you found the support and the services here?
Well, when I first got to Maine, I did come to Portland specifically because I was told that there was a good recovery community here.
Okay.
And so I came here and I moved into a sober house, a men's sober house in Portland, and I went with the intention of being stealth and just kind of like, you know, I'm at the point, and I have been for a couple of years in my transitioning and being transgender, that I can decide when I want to tell people, just because I do pass. So it's really up to me, you know.
Can I just stop you for 1 second? Stealth, I just want to tell the audience, stealth is when a trans person is seen the way they want to be seen, and so they live their lives in that manner and not tell people that they're trans. Ironically, it's still a form of hiding, and often we have to do that really for safety issues, because safety isn't just about someone like hauling you off and punching you in the head. It's about what we said, the disrespect, you know, the dirty looks, the texting. Those are safety issues to me. I just want to share, I was in a class and I really enjoyed my classmates, and I enjoyed my instructor, and had every intention to actually come forward as a trans person, when ironically they had a conversation about trans issues, and it became very clear to me very quickly that that wouldn't be safe. Now, did I think anyone would hurt me physically? No. But he was in charge of my grades, and you and I talked about that. When you tell someone you're trans and that look in their eye and you see it, and it's like that respect is gone. So, I mean, in some ways it's like wonderful, and you and I would never go without our testosterone, but yet society is just not there yet, not at all.
Oh no.
So anyways, I'm sorry, I interjected just to educate the audience about stealth, and you know, just go ahead and go on.
Well, thank you for doing that. So anyways, so like I was saying, I was planning on being stealth and kind of at my discretion letting people know, and what happened was I started to find out that I was outed actually before I even got there.
Oh, goodness.
So, and then, you know, there was a lot of reasons that I actually left that sober house and went to a different one, but on my last day there, these guys were kind of saying, oh, well, we expected you, we were waiting, and the guy that owns the house was here waiting for you to show up that day because we were just waiting, expecting you to look like Caitlyn Jenner or something. And you know, I don't really know, I guess, what that means, but I think that they really wanted it to be like a big deal, I guess, or something.
Yes.
And that was hurtful, you know.
Sure.
And so I moved into a different sober house, men's sober house, and also went as stealth. But at this point, I had started to kind of come out in the recovery community because I felt like it was important for people to realize that trans people have such an like extra struggle in that. Like, I mean, in every step of the way for me, it's been really tough, and I really wanted to give that a voice because I worry about like there being a lot of trans folks out there that don't seek out recovery from addiction because they don't want to go through it, and I wish I could tell them that it's, you know, it's not what they are thinking, but unfortunately for me so far it has been challenging.
It has been challenging. I know. I would think it would be in recovery. I've had depression myself, and I've been hospitalized, but I was as a female. And like you, when I transitioned, I've actually been off of medications and doing really, really well. Except I have to be honest that the past month or so, there's been some significant discrimination that's gone on for me, and I find myself kind of going down a little bit. So I'm glad that you're willing to come forward. I think there are a lot of people who are afraid to get help, because there is that extra barrier. And not everyone does want to be outed, and not everyone, there's just so many things going on, and this is the whole intent of this program, is to really normalize this, that we are just regular people. In fact, you and I talked about how boring we are.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
It was like, I know when people meet me, they automatically just seem to think that I go clubbing, and I remember the first time someone asked me about BDSM, I'm like, what's BDSM? And I have been asked that several times. I have no idea what it was, but I did watch that, 50 Shades of Grey, so have probably not an accurate portrayal of it, but yeah, I've had people constantly like, oh, we're going to the drag show, you want to come? And I've like, no, not really, and I've never been. So like, my idea of a good time literally is taking a hike or a bike ride. And what about you? What's your...
Yeah, I like to read a lot. And
to read?
Yeah, I mean, I go to the movies. I don't do a lot either. And the biggest thing for me is often people think either that I'm a gay man,
yes,
or sort of gay in general, maybe, like maybe a gay woman. I don't know if that gets confused along the way. I don't know, but often people say, "Oh, well, I know a gay person, or I have a gay friend," and I'm like, "Well, it's not." It
isn't the same. That's interesting to me as well. I also get that people think I'm gay. And I don't mind, because in a way I suppose it's a bit progressive than just assuming that I am heterosexual. But it looks like we got to wrap this up. I could do this all night long. Okay, so anyways, yeah, we're just regular people doing regular things. My line of thought just got interrupted. So I think we're just going to go ahead and wrap this up. I think I will continue to do more shows about trans men and their issues. I'm going to continue to do more shows about trans men and our issues, more in-depth interviews. So I'm rather hoping, Andrew, that you'll like to come back on, because I think there's a lot more for us to talk about.
Oh, absolutely.
But again, thank you for your interest in gender dignity, unique and equal. And it's a real sincere attempt on my part that you just see us as people, that we want the same things that you do. Thank you and good night.